Good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we explore important issues at the intersection of faith and the modern world. We're fortunate to have a real leader within the Episcopal Church. Dr. Rob Radke is part of our parish, and he's joining us for the forum today to talk about these past 2 years of COVID-19 and what it's been like to respond to this historic pandemic. Dr. Radke is the president and CEO of Episcopal Relief and Development, which is the arm of the Episcopal Church that does so much good work in responding to disasters throughout the world. Their focus is disaster relief as well as women and children and stemming the effects of climate change. Dr. Radke, it's really great to have you back at the forum today.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. It's great to be here.
I think your mic.
Muted?
I think so.
Good morning.
There we go.
Is that better? Yes. Thank you, Peter. It's wonderful to be here and to be playing my hometown. I haven't been able to get out on the road for the last 2 years, so I'm really pleased to be able to be here both online and with so many friends in person. So thank you for having me. What I thought I'd do this morning is to just do a very quick overview of the response that Episcopal Relief and Development has mounted in response to the pandemic over the last 2 years. And then what's much more interesting to me is to have a conversation with you and whatever anybody else has on their minds. As I was preparing for this presentation, I was sort of reflecting back, and I wonder of technology these days. I searched my email, and the first email that I received about an emerging pandemic that was at that point really just in China, or at least we thought it was just in China, was on January 26th, 2020. So literally just about exactly 2 years ago today. And I'm not sure any of us could have imagined where we would be 2 years then, in January of 2022. And I'm sure many of us are wondering where we're going to go. And I don't have an answer to that question, but I think I have some idea of how we're going to get there. So why don't I do this presentation, and we can talk a little bit about how Episcopal Relief and Development has been responding, and then try to peer a little bit into how it may or may not unfold into the future. So the questions that I'm going to address in this presentation are, who are we reaching as Episcopal Relief and Development? What are we learning as we do this work? And what lies ahead? This is a map that shows the response of Episcopal Relief and Development around the world. We're active now in approximately 54 countries, including the United States, responding here to the pandemic. Many of these were long-standing partners of Episcopal Relief and Development. In other words, we had relationships ongoing prior to the pandemic, but many of them have also joined our program as a result of the work of responding to the pandemic. Episcopal Relief and Development's primary way of operating is through equipping the local churches, and in our case, local churches of the Anglican Communion, to deliver service to the most vulnerable in the priorities that Peter mentioned before: disaster response, integrated early childhood development, responding to gender-based violence, and helping communities build resilience to climate change. All of that work continued over the last 2 years. We didn't down tools on that work, even as we layered onto it the work of responding to the pandemic. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our friends down at the end of the island, Trinity Church Wall Street, who have generously supported the Episcopal Churches and Episcopal Relief and Development's response to the pandemic with about $2 million worth of grants from their philanthropies. That's been supplemented by many, many generous donations from many of you online, many of you sitting here in this room. So none of it would have been possible without all hands on deck. Our goal in 2021 was to reach over 2 million people. We don't yet have the final numbers from the last quarter, but as of October of 2021, you can see that we had already surpassed the goal and doubled the number of people that we were meeting. The kind of response that Episcopal Relief and Development offered was very much tailored to individual contexts. Episcopal Relief and Development prides itself on not having a kind of one-size-fits-all response to any problem. We spend a lot of time in discernment with our partners to understand what their priorities are, and how we can best serve them. But to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we did, it included distributing personal protective equipment in places like the DR Congo, providing PPE and food support to people in Haiti. We did, again, food support in Lima, focused on a female community of prisoners in particular, where the church there, a very small Anglican presence, but the church has a special charism. In the Diocese of South Sudan, Juba, we did a lot of information distribution, just giving people the basic knowledge that they needed to protect themselves against COVID, reaching nearly 200,000 people in internally displaced camps, along with, of course, better water and sanitation practices. Again, in Sri Lanka, providing food, in Uganda and Kenya, supporting economic resilience efforts, and helping a lot of the micro-entrepreneurs during the shutdowns. Most of the rest of the world went through what we did in March, April, May of 2020, which is that markets shut. Everybody was asked to go back home, and all of us could go online and order the things that we needed to deliver to our homes, but for most people in the world, that simply wasn't an option. They had to close their businesses. They could no longer go to the markets to sell or to buy. So economies completely shut, and the church was called on to provide food support. We did a lot of work around educating on prevention and care. In Tanzania, we collaborated with the Mothers Union on prevention guidance. We focused specifically here in the United States on reaching vulnerable groups. We provided support for vaccination sites, food, housing and utilities assistance, again, PPE, mental health services. I'm sure, even just speaking for myself, the wear and tear on mental health on people throughout this pandemic has been extraordinary and continues to have knock-on effects. We focused on homeless populations, low-income families, unemployed, and lower wage earners who may have not been part of the official systems, the undocumented, for example, who couldn't get access to a lot of the financing that was available to some of the rest of us. An example of this work comes from the Diocese of Ohio. They have a wonderful farm called Bellwether Farm that produces organic food. They supplied this to the local food pantries run through the church to make it available to, again, elderly, low-income, and homeless individuals. This is our sort of common themes for the response that we gave. You can see that we focused on food security, making sure people had the right equipment, timely and accurate information. The rest of the world suffers from the same disinformation campaigns that we're suffering from here in this country. And then also safeguarding the vulnerable, in particular women and children, many of whom were required to remain at home in situations that weren't always safe. We wrapped that in a lot of pastoral care, which is something the church really is very good at. And then also, because it really matters, we wanted to learn from what we were doing and did a lot of data collection, monitoring, evaluation, and learning as a result so that we could constantly improve. Which leads me to the question of what are we learning in this pandemic? And what are we learning from our particular response? The first big lesson, the first big takeaway is that, and it feels obvious to state it now, but if you'd have asked me 2 years ago, I might not have said it, cash works. It made a huge difference in this country, and it has been a strategy that not just Episcopal Relief and Development, but many NGOs and other governments around the world have been using to reach people. It's fast. A good bit of the world has access to digital cash. Not as much as is needed, of course, but it did work as a way to reach people, in addition to providing information about the prevention. I'm just going to look here. About 1.1 billion people, comes from the World Bank, about 1.1 billion people received some kind of digital cash transfer during the pandemic. That's about 14% of the world's population. That doesn't sound like a huge percentage, but when you recognize that each person probably represents a family, or many of these individuals represent families, it was a fairly effective way of getting money and resources into hands pretty quickly. The problem, of course, is that it tended to favor male-headed households. Women do not have access, nor do they have digital identities at the same level that we might here in the United States. So if you're going to try to focus on the most vulnerable in the community, women and children, cash transfers, you need to find ways to mitigate against it not going, or that it doesn't reach beyond just the heads of household, which are predominantly men and who control the cell phones and control the digital identities for their families. The crisis is shedding light on the long-going holes in current social protection systems, and all the way throughout, both at the very bottom and, of course, at the middle. The other thing, of course, is the focus on food. You can send cash digitally to many places, but there are a lot of places where you can't. And so providing vouchers for food, direct food aid was another way that the Anglican Church and Episcopal Relief and Development supported that work. Particularly here, these are photographs from South Africa and also from one of our Philippines. We also did a food for labor, or a cash for work, I should say. So rather than just giving people money, there were occasions where we asked people, or our church partners provided opportunities for people to work in exchange for funding. The overall lesson is, to quote the children's rhyme, be nimble and be quick. This is certainly the way the virus has acted. It's been very nimble, it's been very quick, and we all have to learn, or we've had to learn, how to be those things in our response. One of our principal ways of working on the priorities that I named earlier of childhood development, gender-based violence, disaster response, and climate resilience is through what are called savings with education, and that's SWE, savings with education groups, which are served 90% of which serve women. But it's based on social proximity. And so if you have to do social distancing, which you do, you have to rethink how you're going to do a savings group that way. So we introduced some digital technologies. We created buddy systems, for example, that rather than bring 20 women together under the tree, we would do it, pair people off, and try to be nimble about how to do that. Again, introducing technologies where there might not have been technologies available, so purchasing digital equipment in some instances for some of these savings with education groups, and teaching people how to use things that you and I carry around in our pockets all the time, but the access to the various apps that are available. The other aspect of this, of course, is psychosocial care. This has been particularly important for vulnerable women and children. There's been a tremendous rise in violence against women. We find that's the case anytime communities are under any kind of pressure, and here we've had almost every community in the world under pressure. So we've seen a consequent rise in violence. So making sure that we have COVID-safe safe houses or strategies and ways for women to reach out and find support, even if they don't have access to the normal kind of social interactions that would be the case. One of the things that we find is that the church has really good understanding of psychosocial care in most of its local communities. And so strengthening and giving the church the tools and equipment to do that has been something that's been really important. Right now, we're in the process of refreshing our COVID response and our response strategy. We're going to place a heightened emphasis on gender and social inclusion as we design our programs going forward. Cash, again, and focusing that cash assistance particularly on women and finding ways to get the cash into the hands of women is going to be an important part. The hand washing and strategies that we've been using have been important, but now that masks are much more widely available, it's really masks that are going to be the intervention I think, that does the most to protect people. So we're shifting our emphasis away from simply, be sure you're washing your hands, which remains important, don't get me wrong, but adding into that the importance of wearing masks. That was not a practical strategy for us early on because there simply weren't masks available. That's less the case now than it was certainly 2 years ago or even a year ago. We've all seen it, I'm sure. The same has been true in the developing world. Food and prices have gone way, way up. Production has been down. Markets have fallen apart. So providing, again, food and cash for food assistance. As I mentioned earlier, Trinity Church, Wall Street, has been a vital partner for this. They have supported all of this work. The other aspect of this, as we look forward, that we're going to be focusing on is ongoing distribution of personal protective equipment and, of course, vaccines when they become available. Vaccine equity is a big issue. This chart here shows you where the vaccines have gone. You can see at the top end of the chart, it's wealthy countries that have the lion's share of the vaccines, with places like Ghana, Nigeria, and Haiti at the back end. There's a social justice issue, of course, with this involved with vaccine distribution, just getting vaccines into the hands of the people, into the arms, really, of the people who need them. But it's more complicated than that. Distribution of vaccines is not an easy fix. The vaccines that were developed here require a medical infrastructure that is simply not available in most of the rest of the world. So as the scientific community begins to develop vaccines that don't need to be in a cold chain or as in the high degree of a cold chain, when we can come up with some oral vaccines, for example, I think we'll see the vaccine problem begin to recede, but it's not going to go away anytime soon. So it's not simply a question of advocating for vaccines, it's also thinking through the distribution problems and also vaccine hesitancy. It's every bit as real in other parts of the world as it is here in the United States. And so equipping the church with the proper information and tools to fight back, it can be a very, very effective tool that if the clergy are properly equipped for them to urge that their parishioners get vaccines, and go back for the second dose if they need a booster or even the third dose. Rebuilding trust in order to ensure vaccine access is a priority. Episcopal Relief and Development really cut its teeth on malaria prevention, in the sort of 10, 15 years ago, mass net distribution. And one of the things we learned is that education is really essential to be successful. Certainly when I started out in this work, most people who had a child who died of malaria had no idea what the cause of malaria was, how they even contracted malaria. And so teaching people simply about the efficacy of using a net was just, sort of almost 80% of the problem. The last 20% was actually the net. We have a similar challenge, I think, with vaccine uptake as we look globally. Continue to focus on economic resilience. I've mentioned all of this to ensure that all are vaccinated. That is going to be one of our priorities. The challenge really is, and when you pull back from this, we have lost nearly 20 years of progress in global poverty alleviation. Prior to the pandemic, 2 years ago, we were on a pretty strong glide towards getting a good bit of the world's population above the, whatever it is, $2 a day floor for global poverty. That progress has been lost, and by some estimates, nearly 20 years of progress, which represents my entire career in this business. And so one of the things you have to really do is to fight against the sense of this is just overwhelming. How do we even begin to think about moving forward? And I take great comfort from these words from the Talmud. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And that really, I think, encapsulates the last 2 years. So thank you for having me here, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Radke, for outlining what has been...
Please, call me Rob. Dr. Radke's way too clinical.
Thank you, Rob, for outlining this really impressive work. If you have questions for Rob, I encourage you to send them in. You can use the live chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook. You can also email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. That's pthompson@stbarts.org. If you're physically here in the room, in person at St. Bart's, you can use all of those ways. Or Manny Rodriguez-Leach, my colleague, has comment cards that you can use to share a comment or a question. Rob, we were talking before we started today about Episcopal being in the name of Episcopal Relief and Development, and in many ways you're doing this work on behalf of the Episcopal Church. I wonder if you can talk about what it means to do the work of alleviating the effects of COVID-19 from a faith perspective. You talked about the Talmud at the end, but what it's been like as a faith-based organization.
I think being a faith-based organization...
I think, yeah.
Have I lost... Is this better?
Yep.
Yeah, I keep muting myself. Being a faith-based organization gives us kind of our secret power. It first of all inspires us, to live out the gospel, to live out these words of Micah, and to, get up every day and do this work, and to have hope in doing this work. So that's sort of at the spiritual level. It's a great energizer for this work. But at a sort of a practical level, and one of the things that I think differentiates Episcopal Relief and Development from other secular NGOs and even from some other faith-based NGOs is that we have access through our global network to churches around the world that are really beyond the end of the road. So access to extremely vulnerable people who are otherwise not being served. When I was able to travel, it was not uncommon for me to, fly for 12 hours and drive for another 18 hours and then walk for another 3 hours to get to the place where we were doing a malaria net distribution, for example. And often the only piece of infrastructure, the only presence in those communities that had any connection to the outside world was a house of worship. In our case, an Anglican church, sometimes it's a mosque, sometimes it was some other denomination. There was no representative of the police, there was no government, there was no health clinic, there was nothing. And so faith presence gives us access and legitimacy in communities that would otherwise be unreached. And that has been even more heightened during this COVID pandemic, I think.
Can you also talk a little bit about Episcopal Relief and Development as a global organization? What is it like to keep track of all these different countries and the ways in which you can best help there? We also had a question in the chat about how many staff you have and how many are within the U.S. and how many are outside.
Sure. So what was the first part of your question?
The global nature. How do you keep track of the different conditions in all these different countries around the world?
First of all, we're part of a global communion, the Anglican Communion. So we have relationships that are part and parcel of how we do this work and at the center of how we do this work. Prior to the pandemic, my very talented staff would spend a lot of time in face-to-face conversations and meeting with our partners, who are often the local equivalent of Episcopal Relief and Development. Whether that's the Zambian Anglican Outreach Council or the Angladesh, which is the arm of the Episcopal Church in Honduras that does this work. That switched to being online. Digitization has been a vital tool in all of this, as I think I've said, but it's also been a vital tool in our being able to maintain and sustain the relationships. How much longer we're going to be able to ride the momentum of that simply through digital interaction or on Zoom or wherever, remains to be seen. I keep thinking we're kind of 6 months away from being able to go and visit our partners. Now, we've equipped all of our partners with very, very strong monitoring, evaluation, and data collection capacity. So, I'm very confident that we've got a very good sense of what's actually happening. We give our partners a lot of discretion about how they want to serve their communities. They know their communities the best. We try to walk humbly in this work. There's a lot we need to learn as we're doing it. The total size of the staff is about 60 people. The vast majority of them are here in the United States. We have a small office in Africa, our Africa regional office, which is in Accra, Ghana, where we have some forward deployed staff. And then we have one person who works out of Sri Lanka. It's about 60 people, but we leverage, that's a very small organization for the kind of programmatic footprint that we're talking about, but we're able to do that because we're highly leveraged through the Anglican Communion, and we don't put our own boots on the ground. We're building the capacity of the local church there, which makes it much more sustainable over the long run.
Is there a particular approach to combating COVID-19 that you've seen in somewhere around the world that you thought was particularly effective?
Well, it's what I said in my presentation. It's getting money into people's hands fast. When economies stop, people can't eat, they can't feed their children. You need to address that quickly. So using digital means to do that has been the big learning that we've had. I mean, we kind of tiptoed around direct cash assistance. There's always there's a debate going on in the development space about whether you're better off just wiring the money to whomever it is who needs whatever they need, rather than over-involving yourself in how they decide and how they choose to use the resources. And I think the scales have tipped pretty dramatically towards a bias, particularly in crises of direct cash assistance. So the partners that have done that the most effectively, the partners that I've mentioned in my presentation. In Haiti, it wasn't directly related to the pandemic, but there's been a huge earthquake in Haiti. I mean, I'm not sure many of us noticed over the summer, but our earthquake response, which I haven't really talked about here, has been informed by what we learned from COVID, with putting a much greater emphasis on direct cash assistance.
You mentioned the earthquake. You've also talked about how COVID has affected poverty relief. One question we have here asks how COVID may have distracted or not from other health emergencies that are taking place around the globe, and how do you manage combating COVID-19 while also dealing with other health emergencies, and how do you prioritize?
Probably inadequately. I mean, to be completely honest, there's only so much bandwidth that any individual or any organization can have. Having said that, in 2021, we responded, in 2020, the first year of the pandemic, I get confused. The first year of the pandemic, we responded to twice as many natural disasters, and including the COVID, which I in many ways consider a natural disaster, than we did in prior years. So we've doubled our disaster response. And it's complicated, our disaster response. Let's just take the fires that seem to be plaguing the western part of this country. When people flee their homes during a pandemic, how are they going to take shelter in communal facilities, which has been the model? Everybody gathers at the local school, or if there's a hurricane coming, you go to the high school, which has been designated as your gathering place. So having to rethink all of that, or being sure that there's COVID prevention PPE or whatever it might be needed in the local context. So what we're trying to do now is integrate, and I think we're all going to have to do this in our lives, managing COVID as just a fact of life for the foreseeable future. It's going to, have waves. It's going to go up and it's going to go down. It'll be like the weather. I don't mean to trivialize it because people are losing their lives, but it's going to. I already begin to do this. What is the forecast I'm supposed to go to Texas next month. What's the forecast for COVID in Texas next month? And I'm looking at what are the trends? How many infections per 100,000 are there in various places? Well, maybe I'll go to Houston, but not Dallas. We'll begin to normalize some of that in our lives, and we'll normalize that in our work, responding to disasters.
And that's been part of our life here at St. Bart's. Is it safe to hold coffee hour this week? Maybe next week? And can we pass the offertory plate? All those sorts of questions.
Yeah, exactly.
The next question is about vaccine hesitancy, and you talked about the importance of these local faith communities. How have they helped kind of tamp down on vaccine hesitancy and encouraging folks to get vaccinated?
Well, you have to start with being sure that the local faith leaders themselves, who may have vaccine hesitancy, overcome their own hesitancy about vaccines. So that's where we focus. And being sure that the clergy and lay faith leaders, because lay faith leaders, particularly in the Mothers Union, are vital partner in this kind of COVID prevention, are properly informed themselves. That's about being sure that credible messengers to them are providing that information. And in some cases, that's us. In some cases, it's local medical authorities. And being sure that the clergy are equipped with the right information about vaccines so that they can overcome vaccine hesitancy. But the other challenge of all of this is that if you build up demand for vaccines and you don't have the supply to meet that demand, you've created another problem, which is that people no longer have confidence in the system. If you say everybody must get vaccinated, and we went through some of this in this country, and then suddenly you've run out of vaccines or they were never available, you have a credibility issue. So, trying to calibrate that and being sure that your education around vaccine efficacy is coordinated with local vaccination campaigns, whether it's polio or any other thing, HIV prevention or COVID, it's really important. And that's where the local presence is absolutely essential. We could roll out vaccine education programs around the world, but if vaccines are not available in the local context, you're ultimately doing more damage in the medium term than you are by sort of holding back a little bit and working on access first. I'm not sure that's really the answer to the question, but that's what comes to mind.
One person wonders how you decide to spend your resources globally. How do you decide where to deploy staff, where to send money? What informs those decisions?
So let's take COVID out of the equation. Sorry. Let's take COVID out of the equation. Every time I sit back, I mute myself.
It's a tricky little thing.
Every time, taking COVID out of the equation, in other words, if I'd answered this question 2 years ago, the answer would be that we have the priorities that I've mentioned before. So integrated early childhood development, gender-based violence, and climate resilience. So prior to COVID, we had about 30 partners globally that we'd been working with, on an ongoing basis, in some cases many decades. We know each other extremely well. They helped us identify these particular priorities as ones that they felt they had particular skills and where they felt there was a particular need. So we let the partners set the agenda and figure out where we can add value in that process. And some of that value is money, of course, but it's also technical assistance. It's also access and knowledge to global networks of people who are expert in the various things that we're looking forward, and as a convener. So peer learning has been a really important part of our strategy, and this is where COVID has actually helped. We no longer have to fly people all over the world to attend a workshop on early childhood development. We can bring them together weekly or bi-weekly or whatever it is on Zoom for that kind of conversation. So, how we decide depends on what our partners want in the first instance, and depends on where we feel we have particular skills and expertise. And we have increasingly been recognized as an organization that has particular skills and expertise in integrated early childhood development. And that's where we've gotten the most attention from Secular funders like the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, the UNICEF, some of the big global funders on child issues have turned to us as a valued partner. When a disaster happens, like a COVID, then it's about who has the capacity to respond. So, not all places have either the wherewithal or the motivation necessarily to respond to a disaster. And so we go through a process of, to use a church word, discernment do you have a need that we can help meet? In the case of COVID, we just simply went to our network and said, we want to do whatever we can to help you. You tell us what you need. And we did a lot of sort of small piloty things in the first 3 months to kind of figure out what was working and what wasn't working. And then the places that were delivering results, we shifted our investment and scaled those up into larger programs, which would be the model that we would follow in any sort of a disaster, whether it's a hurricane or a fire or an earthquake. We look to the local partner, either in the United States or overseas, to tell us what they think they can do, or what they want to do and would like to get the skills to do, and go from there.
Our next question comes from our rector, who wonders how your personally, how your faith sustains you and informs you in the work that you do.
Well, St. Bart's sustains me. One of the, I hesitate to use this word, but one of the gifts of the pandemic has been to reconnect with this community. It used to be that I was an absent parishioner. I was traveling 60, 70% of the time. And so St. Bart's has been a really important place for pastoral support. And I really want to salute the clergy and the wonderful staff here that got St. Bart's online as fast as it did, because that made a huge difference to me personally and to my family in getting through this pandemic.
You're focused on doing this work all around the world. Here in this hyper-local context, we have Crossroads Community Services, which experienced much longer lines than usual during this pandemic with all the economic insecurity and hunger. Can you speak about how we can view the relationship between our own hyper-local context and also our responsibility to care for people around the world?
Often this gets framed, this is a politely framed version of the question, if there's so many problems at home, why should I worry about problems overseas? And I have one answer to that, Omicron, that if we don't address this pandemic everywhere, it will be with us forever. So, sort of standing back, what happens to any of us happens to all of us, whether that's here at, Park and 50th, or in a township in South Africa, or in a prison of women in Peru. That we all need to be concerned about our neighbors, and our neighbor has to be defined in the broadest possible way. And so it's a both and. I mean, that's certainly the strategy that my family takes. I mean, we try to support local work here because we recognize this is where we're rooted and this is our community and from the community from which we get our strength. But we use that strength to help people who don't have access to the kinds of things that we need around the world. So, we can't shut ourselves off as much as we'd like it. There's bound to be another variant of this as long as the world is unvaccinated. And the degree to which it has an impact on us or not is hard to say. But, as I've said earlier in my presentation, this virus is nimble and quick.
Are there solutions you've learned of elsewhere that could be helpful to those of us who are doing work here at Park and 50th?
With respect to the pandemic?
With respect to the pandemic or any of the other work that you do?
I think, you have to have your ears and your heart open. There was a wonderful book called The Pedagogy of the Poor, which is a word I try not to use, but you have to learn constantly from the people you're trying to serve. You do not show up with answers. You must come to whether it's a local homelessness issue or whether it's a GBV question or a violence against women question in the DR Congo, local people have the answers 90% of the time, in my experience. And you need to set aside your ego, and you need to go into the context, and you need to listen and be slow to act. Don't, slow to act isn't quite the way to say it, but be careful about how you act. You want to be sure that you're not disrupting local leadership, for example, undermining local leadership. You want to leverage local leadership, and it can take a while to understand. You need to take the time to understand the local problem before you begin to support them in defining and executing their own solutions.
We have time for just a few more questions, but we do have time for more questions, so I feel free to utilize Facebook, YouTube, or my email, or again, in person, Manny is collecting questions. One of our questioners is pointing to those who are most vulnerable, those who have disabilities, those who are immunocompromised, and the sense that some have that by kind of saying, you know, everyone's going to get it or COVID will be with us forever, that we're minimizing the risk to those populations.
On the contrary, I'm raising the alarm that for those populations. I think we all need to be very concerned about those populations. I mean, so I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I was minimizing it. I'm not. I just think that you know we need to be realistic. That we're going to have to find ways of protecting not just ourselves, but the very people that this questioner mentions, the most vulnerable, the immunocompromised, people who don't have access. You know, the people who suffer from disasters the most are those with the least, or those who have the fewest access to resources. And we absolutely have to put them at the forefront of you know, understanding how we can protect them.
And do you think our leaders should be doing more to point them out and prioritize them in how we think about responding to COVID?
Yeah, which leaders? I mean, there's certainly many leaders who do. You know, I think certainly it's a priority for us when we talk about our COVID response to be focused on the most vulnerable. You know, political leaders have different incentive sets, and I don't want to become political in how I respond to this, but you know, they're trying to do mass communication, and mass communication is usually not very nuanced. So, you know, I try to be a little bit forgiving about that. I'm certainly glad I'm not an elected political leader in this time and age. I would not have the skills for that. But, you know, I think we as people of faith have an absolute responsibility to be sure that we're putting the most vulnerable at the forefront of our thinking.
What can we as St. Bart's do right now? How can we best support Episcopal relief and development in your work?
This is a wonderful way of supporting this work, bringing people together, giving me the opportunity to report and to speak about it is very important. Being a support to me and my family has been really important over the last year, 2 years. So at St. Bart's, that's a great gift that you've all given me, for which I'm grateful. You know, many of you have given very generously of your own financial resources, and that's really important. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You know, I get paid to raise money, and so let me not be too coy about that. You know, you can go to episcopalrelief.org and make a contribution right now to our work, and that's always important. Prayer is really important. The prayer for people who are struggling with this and people who are helping people who struggle with this really matters.
It's been 2 years. It's crazy to think about that it's been that long that we've been dealing with this pandemic. What do you hope we'll be able to say 2 years from now as we look at 4 years since COVID started?
what do I hope for, or what do I think is actually going to be the case? What
Well,
I
I
hope
guess
for
both.
is that we say, COVID, what was that? I don't think that will be the case. I think we'll get to what I said earlier, that it'll be something that we are having to manage sometimes in the background, sometimes in the foreground of our lives. Because I can't predict how this virus is going to adapt to the world. You know, it's proven to be a very, very nimble disease. So I don't really think that it will go away in a way that might have hoped a year ago when we were all sort of racing to get our vaccines. I know that hope certainly was very important to me. I'm trying to be more realistic about that, calibrate my expectations, and in the hopes that I'll be pleasantly surprised. It's going to be a major issue, even if we're able to contain it in the wealthy parts of the world. It's going to continue to be a major issue in less wealthy parts of the world. And as long as it's a major issue there, it's going to be a major issue for us. And I think we have to step up to that reality and really focus on how we can help people who don't have the kinds of resources that we have address this crisis.
Rob, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for all the work that you are doing on behalf of all of us.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, everybody at St. Bart's. It's wonderful to call this my faith community, and I'm really grateful to all of you for being here this morning. So thank you.
Thank you all for being here in person. Thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us for worship in just a few moments at 11 a.m. Next week, we'll be joined virtually by the Reverend Mark Bazzuti Jones, who was once on the clergy staff here at St. Bart's. He's now the Director of Spiritual Formation at Trinity Retreat Center in Connecticut. And he's going to be talking about Absalom Jones as we begin our celebration of Black History Month. And as we approach the feast of Absalom Jones was the first Black priests in the Anglican Communion and here in the United States. So that should be a really wonderful conversation as we welcome back one of our former clergy. We will be kind of off and on virtually and in person, mostly in person after February 6th. We'll hope you'll join us for as many conversations as you're able. Thank you all.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Rob.